Before history was written, she was worshipped, not as an accessory to power, not as a helper, but as the source. The divine feminine wasn't a role, she was reality. She wasn't just honored, she was understood as the origin of all things: creation, emotion, intuition, cycles, death, and rebirth. Her symbols were everywhere: the spiral, the moon, the vessel, the open palm, and her presence was in every myth, not just as goddess, but as ground, not just a figure, but a field. But then something happened. A fracture, not in nature, but in the story we tell about nature. She didn't disappear, she was removed. Her temples became rubble, her names were buried, her power was rewritten, sometimes as evil, sometimes as weakness, sometimes as nothing at all. And in her place, they built a god that only speaks in one voice, one tone, one law, one direction, linear, top-down, control disguised as order, hierarchy dressed as holiness. And we've been living in that imbalance ever since. The removal of the divine feminine wasn't a natural evolution, it was a calculated disruption, a rewriting of the sacred to serve power. Before the rise of conquest religions, before patriarchal empires took the pen and the sword, the world was not godless. It was goddess-full. From Sumer to Kemet, from the Indus Valley to the first Celtic groves, the feminine was the center. The earth was the mother, the sky was the womb, the moon was her pulse, and life was born, nourished, and transformed through her cycles. There were no kings without queens, no gods without goddesses, and often no gods at all, just her. But then came the shift, not in spirit, in structure. Temples were burned, priestesses slaughtered, scriptures rewritten, lines removed, names changed, rituals of flow and rhythm replaced with rituals of control and obedience. The sacred became sanitized, the mystery became doctrine, and the body of woman, once seen as divine technology, was reduced to property, sin, shame. The feminine archetype didn't die, it was fractured, split into extremes, the saint or the whore, the mother or the maiden, the virgin or the temptress, never both, never whole, and men were cut too, cut off from their inner softness, their intuition, their capacity to receive. Because when you erase the feminine from divinity, you erase balance from the human soul. You create war in the psyche, a battle between control and chaos, between domination and surrender, between mind and feeling, and we've all been bleeding from that wound ever since. Look around you. We live in a world obsessed with speed, logic, productivity, and dominance. We're taught to act, not feel, to conquer, not nurture, to prove, not receive. We value structure over sensitivity, goals over intuition, outcomes over experience. This is not coincidence. It's the result of living in an imbalance, a civilization built on only half the equation. The divine feminine was never about women versus men. It was about wholeness, the integration of force and flow, of fire and water, of sun and moon. But now one side is drowning, and we're all paying for it. Depression isn't just sadness, it's disconnection from the womb, literal and metaphorical, from the source of nourishment that tells us we are enough even when we're still, even when we're feeling, even when we're not achieving. Burnout, emotional numbness, spiritual fatigue, these aren't just psychological conditions. They are symptoms of sacred suppression. You were designed to live with both energies alive in you, to act with intuition, to think with compassion, to move with rhythm, to listen to the silence. And when we silence her, we silence ourselves. But there's a reason this message found you now, because something in you remembers, maybe not with your mind, but with your bones. If that part of you is waking up, subscribe and turn on the bell. We're not just talking, we're remembering. Together. The divine feminine has nothing to do with gender. She is not confined to the body. She is a force, and she has always been present in everything that breathes, breaks, heals, or creates. She is not weak. She is not passive. She is the field that holds power and makes it meaningful. Where the masculine penetrates, the feminine receives, not in submission, in alchemy. Because to receive something fully is to transform it. She is not emotional. She is the emotion, the full bandwidth of human feeling from grief to ecstasy. She holds it all because that's what life requires. The ancients understood this. In Tantra, she is Shakti, the activating energy of the universe. In Kemet, she is Ma'at, the principle of truth, balance, and harmony. In the Gnostic mysteries, she is Sophia, divine wisdom, cast out from the heavens but never destroyed. Her wisdom moves in spirals, not straight lines. She doesn't teach through facts, but through presence. She doesn't demand obedience. She invites remembering. And this is what patriarchy could never understand. True power doesn't dominate. It resonates. It invites you to feel something real enough to break you open, then soft enough to put you back together as something truer. But they called this chaos because they couldn't control it. So they called it evil because they couldn't define it. But now, she's returning, not as an idea, as a frequency that people are starting to feel again, in their bodies, in their dreams, in their ache for something they can't name. This isn't feminism. It's not politics. It's not about reclaiming space in the boardroom or rewriting textbooks. It's about frequency correction, a cosmic rebalancing that is starting deep inside the individual and shaking its way up through culture, spirit, and systems. You can feel it. The old ways are cracking. The logic-only mindset is breaking down. The hypermasculine structures are buckling under their own weight. People are tired of being disconnected from their hearts, from each other, from nature, from the womb of the world, and even if they can't name it, they're starting to feel the absence of her. That absence feels like spiritual dryness, like emotional depletion, like the ache for something slower, deeper, wilder, more real. You see it in the way people are returning to the earth, to ritual, to inner work, to things they once called woo or unscientific, but now feel like oxygen. This is not regression, it's return, not to the past, but to a memory buried in your cells. The memory of wholeness. Because the divine feminine isn't a phase, she's not a movement. She is the current beneath all movements. And when she rises, she doesn't ask for permission. She doesn't knock. She floods. She moves through broken hearts, tired bodies, and overanalyzing minds, and reminds you that power is not about control. It's about connection. That softness is not weakness. It's strategy. That rest is not laziness. It's recalibration. The tears are not breakdowns. They're releases of truth that couldn't stay buried anymore. And the more she rises in you, the less tolerable fake living becomes. You start rejecting anything that doesn't vibrate with depth. You start craving silence, truth, intimacy, slowness, sacredness. Not because you're changing, because you're finally returning. You can't study the divine feminine the way you study math. You can't dissect her into modules or facts because she doesn't live in your intellect. She lives in your body, in your gut, in your nervous system. To reconnect with her is not to understand her. It's to feel her again. And that starts in silence, in choosing to slow down in a world that worships speed, to listen inward in a world addicted to noise, to trust your instincts, the quiet tugs, the chills, the nudges, even when they contradict logic. Because her voice isn't loud, it's ancient, and it speaks through signs, dreams, timing, tears, touch, stillness. To come back to her, you must learn how to receive. That's the part they never taught you. They taught you to chase, to strive, to take, but not to open, not to hold, not to let something divine come through you without you trying to control it. You've been trained to value what you can measure, but the feminine lives in what you can't, in intuition, in the unsaid, in the space between words, in the feeling that something is off, even if everything looks right. She lives in your ability to be with discomfort without fixing it, to hold space for others without offering solutions, to honor cycles, including your own times of rest, confusion, breakdown, rebirth. And this is the wisdom patriarchy feared most: stillness that transforms, presence that heals, receptivity that births reality. Because when you reconnect with her, you become uncontrollable, not chaotic, but sovereign, not wild, but whole. You stop being programmable. You stop outsourcing your knowing. You remember that truth isn't something you discover outside you. It's something you reunite with inside you. This is the revolution they can't measure or monetize, because it doesn't shout, it blooms, and when it does, everything around it shifts. This return isn't just personal, it's planetary, because when enough individuals awaken the divine feminine within themselves, the collective begins to shift, not through revolution, but through remembrance. This is how the old world ends, not with fire, but with so many people vibrating differently that the old structures can no longer hold. You start seeing this already. People questioning the rules they once obeyed, leaving systems they once depended on, creating communities, rituals, languages that come not from strategy, but from soul. It's subtle, but unstoppable. Because the feminine doesn't bulldoze, she permeates. She doesn't shout over systems, she whispers under them until they crack. This is what happened in every sacred culture before collapse or conquest. The people lost their connection to her, and soon after, they lost connection to everything else. The land, each other, themselves. So when you reclaim her, when you begin listening to your dreams again, feeling your emotions again, moving with cycles instead of against them, you aren't just healing yourself. You're recalibrating the field. You're telling the collective nervous system, it's safe to feel, it's safe to soften, it's safe to live without pretending. You're showing your children that power doesn't mean force, it means presence, that being receptive isn't weak, it's wise. That tenderness isn't naive, it's nuclear. And as more people begin to vibrate at this frequency, something sacred happens. The need to dominate dissolves, the obsession with certainty fades, the addiction to doing collapses. And we remember what we forgot, that we were never meant to rule the earth. We were meant to belong to her. This is not a metaphor, it's a new blueprint, and it starts not out there, but in you. This isn't about going back to goddess worship. It's not about statues, chants, or New Age trends. It's about something much more subtle, much more radical. It's about recovering a lost way of being human, a way that honors intuition as much as intellect, that sees value in rest as much as productivity, that respects emotion as sacred data and understands that feeling deeply is not a flaw. It's a compass. It's about learning to trust again. Not trust in a God outside of you, but in the sacred pulse within you that you silenced to survive. Because every time you ignored your body, forced yourself through exhaustion, shut down your tears, laughed when you wanted to scream, you buried her a little deeper. Not because you wanted to, but because you were trained to. She didn't go anywhere. She's still here, in your sensitivity, your yearning, your chills when truth gets too close. She's in your creative urges, your wild ideas, your sudden insights that come not from effort but from nowhere, the place where she lives. Reclaiming the divine feminine isn't about changing your beliefs. It's about changing your relationship to your own inner knowing. And when you do that, you unlock something ancient that modern life tried to erase. Not a goddess, a memory, not a myth, a frequency. And once it rises, it doesn't go back to sleep. So tonight, be still, not because you're tired, but because you're listening. Let her speak. Let the dream come. Let the body feel. Let the tears fall if they must. And tomorrow, don't forget what she showed you, because the world doesn't change when we fight it. It changes when we outgrow it. And that begins here, with the quiet, sacred decision to live as if she never left. Because she didn't. She's been waiting, and now you've found the way back. So now I ask you, what part of your own divine feminine have you been taught to suppress? And what would happen if you finally let it rise? Drop your truth in the comments. You might free more than just yourself.